In this video, we will explore one of the fundamental areas of ecology, populations and communities. We'll begin with the biological concept of populations, then discuss carrying capacities and how they're determined by limiting factors. We will look at population growth, including sigmoidal growth curves. We'll also discuss intraspecific relationships and how they can be competitive or cooperative. Finally, we will discuss a wide variety of interspecific relationships, including mutualism, invasive species, top-down and bottom-up control of populations, as well as antibiotics and allelopathy in plant competition. These are some of the key concepts covered in the IB biology syllabus. A population is defined as all the organisms of one species who live in the same place at the same time who can breed together. Members of a population typically share a gene pool and reproduce with one another. Reproductive isolation is an important concept here. It refers to the lack of gene flow between populations of the same species. When populations are reproductively isolated, there's a lack of gene flow between the two groups, and they may evolve independently. This is a key mechanism of speciation. See our key concept on natural selection and evolution for a more detailed look at this concept. Every environment has a carrying capacity, which is the maximum size of a population that it can support over time. For animals, this is determined by limiting factors such as food availability, water, space, and shelter. Limiting factors for plants include light, soil, nutrients, water availability, carbon dioxide, and temperature. When a population exceeds its carrying capacity, these resources become scarcer, causing increased mortality, decreased reproduction, or emigration until the population falls back within sustainable limits. This dynamic equilibrium is a hallmark of stable ecosystems. Population size is regulated by both density-independent and density-dependent limiting factors. Density-dependent factors intensify as a population grows and the density increases. These include competition for resources, avoiding predation, the accumulation of waste products, and the spread of disease. These factors serve as negative feedback mechanisms. As the population grows, these factors reduces the population size back towards the carrying capacity. In contrast, density-independent factors, such as natural disasters or climate changes, affect populations regardless of their size. Many populations show a sigmoid or S-shaped growth curve with 3 phases. The exponential phase, where there's rapid growth of the population while resources are abundant. The transition phase, where population growth slows as limiting factors kick in. And the plateau phase, where population numbers stabilize near the carrying capacity. As the population enters the transition phase, the slope of the curve decreases, indicating a slower growth rate. Although simplified, this model is useful for understanding general trends. Students can model population growth using fast reproducing organisms like yeast or duckweed under controlled lab conditions. Plot population size on the y-axis against time on the x-axis. On a linear y-axis scale, you'll see the S-shaped curve. However, with a log-scaled y-axis, the exponential phase appears as a straight line, which is helpful when values span very small to very large numbers. A linear scale makes the finer details of each phase easier to see, while a log scale aids comparison against wide ranges. Intraspecific relationships, or interactions within a species, include both competition and cooperation. Individuals may compete for food, mates, territory, or nesting sites, and this competition can drive natural selection. Cooperation also occurs, for example, wolves that hunt in coordinated packs. A community comprises interacting populations of different species that coexist within the same area and engage in various ecological relationships. Within these communities, species participate in a range of interspecific interactions with other species. Communities are characterized by the presence of diverse populations of different species living together and interacting through multiple ecological mechanisms. Interspecific relationships can be categorized as herbivory, where primary consumers feed on plants like cows grazing on grass; predation, where one consumer, the predator, feeds on another consumer, the prey, for instance, when ravens hunt mice for food. Interspecific competition is when two species are competing for similar resources, for instance, barnacles that compete for space and food in an intertidal zone. Mutualism occurs when two species benefit from their interactions, for instance, in corals, which we'll discuss in a moment. Parasitism is when one species lives inside or on the surface of another organism, siphoning nutrients from the host, for instance, when a leech feeds off the blood of a host. The parasite benefits while the host is harmed in this relationship. Finally, pathogenicity is distinguished from parasitism as one species is a pathogen that causes disease in the host. Pathogens are often virus, bacteria, and fungi that include examples like tuberculosis bacteria that infect humans. These relationships influence community structure, population dynamics, and the flow of energy and nutrients through the ecosystem. An example of interspecific cooperation includes mutualism, in which both species benefit. Well-known examples include root nodules in legumes like peas and bean plants, where rhizobium bacteria fix nitrogen in exchange for carbohydrates. That is, they convert atmospheric nitrogen that the plant cannot use into a form the plant can use, ammonia. In exchange, the bacteria receive carbohydrates like glucose sugar the plant produces through photosynthesis. Another example is the symbiotic relationship between mycorrhizal fungi and orchid roots, which enhance nutrient uptake. The fungi absorbs the nitrogen and phosphorus from the soil for the orchid. When the orchid is a seedling, the fungi also supplies additional carbon compounds like carbohydrates that it's digested down from dead organisms and tissues. Once the orchid is large enough to photosynthesize, the orchid produces carbon compounds from photosynthesis and provides it to the fungi. Zooxanthellae and hard corals are another example. The hard corals produce a skeleton from calcium carbonate. These corals often contain symbiotic algae called zooxanthellae. The zooxanthellae supply carbon compounds from photosynthesis, as well as oxygen, while the coral provides the algae a safe environment within the calcium carbonate skeleton. The animal polyps within the skeleton also provide carbon dioxide to the algae. These relationships are often so integral that the species involved cannot survive without one another. Invasive species often outcompete native or endemic species by having higher reproductive rates, broader tolerances, or fewer natural predators in their introduced environment. In established ecosystems, density-dependent factors regulate the population sizes of endemic species. When invasive species enter an area, often the factors that would control their growth are not present. For instance, if they have no natural predators, then they may experience a classic sigmoidal growth curve. If they are competing with a native species and their niches overlap because they're pursuing similar resources, then the competitive exclusion principle applies, where the species that is better adapted to exploiting that niche outcompetes the other. If the invasive species outcompetes the endemic species, it can reduce or destroy its realized niche, leading to a reduced or locally extinct population. Predator-prey dynamics are classic examples of density-dependent limiting factors that function as population control. As prey populations increase, predators have more food and their population numbers rise. As a result, predators feed more on the prey population, reducing the population of the prey species. Because the prey population increase ultimately results in prey population decrease, this is a negative feedback mechanism. However, this pattern repeats. Reduced prey population reduces the predator population, as they have not as much prey to feed upon, and this weakens the density-dependent limiting factor of predation. We see both the predator and prey populations going through rises and falls over time, rising above and below the carrying capacity. One well-documented case study involves lynx and snowshoe hares in the boreal forests of North America, which show cyclical fluctuations in population size. In ecosystems, population sizes may be regulated by top-down or bottom-up control. Top-down control occurs when predators or consumers regulate the abundance of lower trophic levels, oftentimes by feeding on the population, as we saw in the last example. When the orca population increases, it decreases the seal population, exerting top-down control. Bottom-up control is the reverse, where the trophic levels below limit the trophic levels above. For example, the availability of nutrients like nitrogen to primary producers affects the population growth of the entire food web. In this example, the amount of nitrogen available in the sunlit zone of the ocean is a bottom-up control of the population. If nitrogen is limited, then it limits phytoplankton growth, which then limits the amount of energy available to the rest of the food chains and web, limiting their populations. Most ecosystems experience both types of control, though one may dominate depending on the context. Some organisms engage in chemical competition by releasing substances into the environment that inhibit the growth of competitors. Because these chemicals are not necessary for the growth of the plant, but can aid in the plant's growth and survival, these chemicals are called secondary metabolites. Two categories of secondary metabolites include antibiotics and allelopathic compounds. Antibiotics are primarily secreted by other microorganisms to reduce and control the growth of other microorganisms competing for the same resources. For instance, penicillin is a fungi that feeds through saprotrophic nutrition, that is, they digest externally. Digested compounds are easy energy sources for bacteria. As a result, some species of this fungi secrete the secondary metabolite penicillin to reduce the population of bacteria that may absorb their digested nutrients. This effect can be seen in petri dishes with a zone of inhibition where bacteria cannot grow where penicillin is present. See our key concept video on enzymes to understand how penicillin kills bacteria. Allelopathic agents are secreted by plants to kill or repress the growth of other plants to reduce competition for soil, sun, or water resources. For example, black walnut trees release jugalone, which inhibits other plants. In this video, we explored some of the ecological principles of populations and communities. Below is a summary of the key concepts we reviewed in this video.